They say hunger can turn a person into a monster. In the frozen forests of North America, that monster has a name, the Wendigo. Chapter 1. Where the legend begins. The story of the Wendigo begins in a place few of us would dare to stay. Imagine the northern forests of North America in the dead of winter. Endless trees stand heavy with snow. The wind howls like a voice that never stops. Food is scarce. Nights are long, stretching on like they will never end, and survival becomes a daily battle. It was here, in these frozen lands, that the legend was born. The Algonquin-speaking peoples, tribes such as the Cree, Ojibwe, and Innu, carried this story across generations. For them, the Wendigo was more than just a tale told by the fire. It was a warning, a reminder of what happens when hunger takes control of the human spirit. The Wendigo is often described as the embodiment of winter itself, cold, merciless, and endless. It represents famine, starvation, and the terrifying changes that can come over people when pushed to their limits. To the tribes, the Wendigo was not a distant creature. It lived in the forests around them, always watching, always waiting for those who grew desperate. The word Wendigo itself has many spellings: Windigo, Witigo, or Windigo. This reflects how widespread the belief was across different groups, but the meaning was always clear: a monster born of hunger and greed. At its heart, the Wendigo legend is about imbalance. In traditional stories, it appears when someone takes more than they need, when selfishness grows stronger than community. And in the long winters of the North, selfishness could mean death for everyone. Imagine sharing a camp with your family, food running out, snow blocking every path. If one person refused to share, or worse, chose to betray the group for survival, the Wendigo was said to come. It wasn't only an external creature. Many believed it could possess a person. A once kind neighbor could suddenly change. They would grow cold, distant, and obsessed with hunger. Then, before anyone understood what was happening, that person would be lost, transformed into something inhuman. The appearance of the Wendigo is as haunting as the legend itself. Early descriptions say it was a giant, taller than the trees, thin and skeletal, with glowing eyes and sharp teeth. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, as if it had never known a full meal. Some say its heart was made of ice. Others claim it smelled of death and decay. One thing never changes: the Wendigo is always starving, no matter how much it feeds. For the Algonquin peoples, these details were not told for entertainment. They were warnings. Just as stories of spirits taught children not to wander too far, the Wendigo warned adults of the dangers of greed and isolation. It was a way to explain the unexplainable, why good people sometimes did terrible things when faced with the cruelty of nature. Winter was not just a season, it was a threat. Without modern tools or technology, survival depended on discipline, sharing, and trust. The Wendigo embodied what could happen if that trust broke down. It turned hunger into a monster you could see and hear. It gave fear a face. But this legend was not just about famine. It carried deeper spiritual meaning. Many elders describe the Wendigo as a spirit of imbalance, a force that grows when a person turns away from harmony with the world. If someone allowed greed to rule them, if they forgot the importance of their people, the Wendigo would rise inside them. That is why even today, the Wendigo is more than just a story. It is a symbol, a reminder of how close humanity always stands to the edge of desperation. The first written accounts of the Wendigo by outsiders came from missionaries and settlers who traveled through these lands in the 1600s and 1700s. They recorded what the tribes told them, often with fear or disbelief. To these outsiders, it sounded like superstition. But to the people who lived in the snow-covered forests, it was as real as the biting cold. Some reports even mention entire communities shaken by a Wendigo sighting. People would claim to see a shadow at the edge of the trees, a tall figure moving silently through the snow. Others spoke of eerie cries carried by the wind. When these events happened, hunters refused to leave camp. Families gathered close, certain that the Wendigo was near. What makes this legend so powerful is how it ties directly into human experience. Everyone knows hunger. Everyone has felt cold and fear. But in the North, those feelings were not small inconveniences. They were life or death. And when survival was tested, the Wendigo story explained the darkness that could grow inside anyone. To understand the Wendigo, you must picture yourself in those conditions. The year is long past. You are part of a small group, deep in the frozen woods. Supplies are gone. Snow blocks every path. At night, your stomach aches with emptiness. Your breath forms clouds in the freezing air. You hear branches crack outside your shelter, but when you look, there is nothing, or perhaps something tall, gaunt, watching from the tree line. Is it your imagination, or is the Wendigo waiting for you to give in? This is how the legend lived on. Through fear, through whispers, through warnings shared in firelight. Parents told their children, never take more than you need. Never abandon your people, and never let hunger consume you, because if you do, the Wendigo will come. And so, from the first spark of its legend, the Wendigo was never just a monster. It was a mirror, a reflection of the darkest part of the human soul, when survival and morality clash. That is where the story begins. Chapter 2. The Monster of Hunger. When people describe the Wendigo, their words always return to one image: hunger made flesh. Imagine a figure taller than any man, so thin its bones almost break through its skin. Its eyes glow with a sickly light. Its lips are torn and bloody. Its body reeks of rot, as if it carries death wherever it walks. This is not just a creature. It is starvation turned into a nightmare. In some stories, the Wendigo is a giant. It stands higher than the trees, moving with slow, terrible steps. Its ribs stick out like sharp branches. Its arms hang long and heavy, ending in claws that look more like broken bone than flesh. Its mouth is always open, filled with teeth too large for its face. The skin is pale, sometimes gray, sometimes with a sickly yellow tint, and always stretched thin, as though it has never once eaten enough. Other tales describe it differently. To some, it is not a physical giant, but a spirit. It slips inside the body of a starving person, turning them into something unrecognizable. This spirit eats away at their mind, their morals, their very soul, until all that remains is hunger. A man who was once a father, a mother, a friend, could suddenly seem possessed, their eyes empty, their voice colder, their behavior strange. Soon after, people whispered that they were no longer themselves. They had become a Wendigo. The detail that repeats across every version is this: the Wendigo is always hungry. It cannot be satisfied. The more it eats, the larger it grows, and the larger it grows, the hungrier it becomes. This cycle never ends. That is why it looks so thin and gaunt. No matter how much it consumes, starvation defines its very being. Some Algonquin elders said the Wendigo's heart was made of ice. This image carried two meanings. First, it explained its lack of warmth, both physical and emotional. A creature with a frozen heart cannot feel pity or kindness. Second, it symbolized the harsh winters of the north. The Wendigo was winter itself, a season that takes and takes, without ever giving back. In other versions, the Wendigo smelled so foul that people could sense it before they saw it. The odor of decay, of bodies long dead, clung to the air around it. Hunters reported following tracks in the snow and finding no animal, only that unbearable stench. This smell became another warning. If you breathed it in, the Wendigo was near. But perhaps the most terrifying detail lies not in its appearance, but in its voice. Survivors spoke of whispers in the forest. At first, soft, like the wind moving through branches. Then clearer. The voice would call their names, or beg them to eat. Imagine being stranded in the woods, snow falling, your body weak with hunger, and then hearing a voice say, "Just one bite, just one taste." Was it madness from starvation? Or was it the Wendigo speaking, urging them towards something unthinkable? This is where the legend ties directly into one of the greatest fears of every tribe: cannibalism. In times of plenty, it was unthinkable. A crime so deep it tore apart not only the body, but also the soul. To consume another human was to step outside of humanity itself. But in times of famine, when the snow trapped entire villages and food ran out, desperation crept in. Some gave in to hunger, some betrayed their own families, and when they did, the Wendigo legend explained why. Cannibalism was not only a physical act, it was spiritual corruption. By eating another person, you opened the door for the Wendigo. You were no longer yourself. You became part of the monster. This is why the Wendigo was more than a warning. It was a way to give shape to the horror of survival at any cost. Imagine the fear of those winters. Supplies gone, the forest empty of game, people sitting close to the fire, not daring to speak of what might happen. And then, one day, a neighbor begins to act strangely. They stare too long at the others. Their hands shake. They mutter under their breath. At night, they wander outside and return with snow on their lips, eyes wide, whispering about voices. The others know what it means. They are no longer safe. The Wendigo has entered their camp. In many stories, once the Wendigo took hold, there was no turning back. The person would eventually attack, consumed by a hunger they could not control. To stop them, others sometimes killed the possessed before they could do harm. This act, though brutal, was seen as necessary, a way to protect the community from the monster that had already taken root. The dual image of the Wendigo, both giant and spirit, shows how powerful this legend became. On one hand, it was an external threat, stalking the woods, waiting to devour those who wandered too far. On the other, it was an internal sickness, a possession that could turn anyone into a monster. No one was safe. Hunger could make the Wendigo appear outside your camp, or inside your very heart, and this fear reached far beyond simple superstition. Early European settlers recorded stories of people claiming to be haunted by a hunger they could not control. These settlers, unfamiliar with the legend, still described symptoms that matched the Wendigo tale. A man who refused food, claiming it was not enough. A woman who begged to be tied up, afraid she would harm her children. Voices in the forest, shadows in the snow. Always the same pattern: hunger, whispers, transformation. For the people of the north, the Wendigo explained what starvation does to the mind. It took the terrible reality of famine and turned it into a being they could fear, fight, and warn against. It was easier to say the Wendigo is near than to face the truth that a loved one might betray the group in desperation. The monster gave shape to the unthinkable. Even today, the Wendigo remains one of the most terrifying creatures in folklore, because it is not far from reality. It is not a dragon, or a vampire, or something purely supernatural. It is a story born from human experience, from hunger, cold, and the desperate will to survive. That is why the descriptions strike so deep. A gaunt body, a heart of ice, a stench of death, a whisper in the trees. Each detail feels possible, because each detail comes from truth. When you imagine the Wendigo, you are not just imagining a monster. You are imagining the human soul when stripped of warmth, food, and hope. And perhaps that is why people still fear it, because the Wendigo is not only out there in the woods. It might also be waiting inside, hidden in the darkest corners of human nature. Chapter 3. The real encounters legends are powerful. But what makes the Wendigo so terrifying is how often people claimed to actually see it. From the 1800s to the early 1900s, stories spread across Canada and the northern United States. Missionaries, traders, and settlers all wrote about men and women who swore they had faced something unnatural in the frozen woods. These weren't just tales told around the fire. They were testimonies recorded in journals, court cases, and community memories. One of the earliest accounts speaks of a Cree man who fell victim to strange visions during a brutal winter. Food was gone. The snow piled so high it cut off every path. His family noticed changes in him. He began to talk less, staring into the flames for hours. At night, they heard him whisper, though no one was near. He claimed voices called his name from the forest, voices that promised relief if he would only eat. His body grew weaker, yet his eyes seemed to burn brighter. The family feared what these whispers meant. They believed the Wendigo was close. To them, he was not just starving, he was being claimed by the monster of hunger. Stories like his circulated widely. For every whisper of wind in the trees, people wondered if the Wendigo was speaking. Then there were the sightings. Hunters and trappers wrote of strange figures in the distance. Sometimes they described tall, thin shadows moving between trees, too large to be a man, too silent to be an animal. Other times, they found tracks in the snow, enormous prints that went on for miles, vanishing without explanation. Imagine being alone in the woods, the cold biting into your skin, your breath fogging the air. Then you hear it. Footsteps that don't match your own. You stop. The sound stops too. You walk again. Crunch, 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 always behind you. When you finally turn, the trees stand silent, but you feel watched. These reports filled letters and journals, passed from one person to another, spreading fear across the frozen frontier. But no story captures the horror of the Wendigo more than the case of Swift Runner in 1878. Swift Runner was a Cree man who lived in Alberta, Canada. He was known as a strong hunter, capable of supporting his family through harsh winters. But that year, something changed. The winter was long and merciless. Supplies ran low. When spring came and people finally returned to his camp, they found a nightmare. Swift Runner's wife, his children, even his mother-in-law, all dead. Bones lay scattered, some broken open, stripped of flesh. At first, people thought starvation had forced him to do the unthinkable. But the truth was more chilling. There had been food nearby. Other families had survived the same winter without turning to such acts. Swift Runner himself looked healthy, not like a man who had starved. When questioned, he confessed. He said a force had taken hold of him, a hunger beyond reason. He claimed the Wendigo had possessed him, driving him to kill and eat his own family. His confession shocked not just his community, but the settlers and police who recorded it. For the Cree, it was a tragic but clear case. Swift Runner had become a Wendigo. For the courts, it was murder. He was tried and executed. Yet the legend of his possession lived on. To this day, his story is told as proof that the Wendigo was more than a myth. Swift Runner's case was not the only one. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, missionaries and doctors reported what they called Wendigo psychosis. People claimed to feel consumed by hunger even when food was available. They begged to be restrained, fearing they would attack their families. In some cases, entire communities believed someone had turned into a Wendigo and carried out desperate measures to protect themselves. One account from northern Ontario described a man who wandered into town in the middle of winter, begging for help. He said he could hear voices from the forest telling him to eat human flesh. He wept, saying he didn't want to, but the voices grew louder every night. The townspeople, terrified, tied him up to stop him from harming anyone. To them, this was no illness. This was the curse of the Wendigo. Modern readers might dismiss these as cases of mental illness or the effects of starvation on the brain. But for those who lived through it, there was no doubt. They had seen the signs. They had heard the whispers, and in the silent snow-choked forests, the Wendigo was as real as the frostbite on their skin. Even in more recent times, strange encounters continue to surface. Campers speak of being followed by something they never see. Hunters describe feeling watched for hours, only to hear branches snap and snow crunch behind them, though no tracks remain. People living in remote cabins report hearing their names called at night, in voices that sound almost human, but not quite. One chilling account tells of a hunter who woke to find footprints circling his camp. They were massive, far larger than any man's. The tracks stopped just outside his tent, then vanished. He never saw the creature, but he heard breathing in the dark, heavy, ragged, too close. He never returned to that forest again. Another story comes from a hiker in Minnesota who described hearing footsteps behind him for miles. Every time he stopped, the steps stopped. He finally turned and shouted into the trees, but nothing answered. That night, as he tried to sleep, he swore he heard whispers just beyond the edge of his firelight. Not words he could understand, but the sound of something hungry. These modern encounters may not carry the same weight as historical court cases or confessions, but they show that the fear of the Wendigo still lingers. The forest remains vast, silent, and unforgiving, and in that silence, the human mind still wanders. What if something is out there, watching, waiting? The Wendigo legend lives because it bridges myth and reality. Starvation is real. Hunger can twist the mind. Isolation can make people hear voices that aren't there. But when those experiences match the stories told for centuries, people cannot help but believe. The line between imagination and truth blurs in the snow. So when we hear about the Cree man haunted by whispers, or the settlers who saw shadows in the trees, or the horrific tragedy of Swift Runner, we are left with the same question they faced. Were these simply humans breaking under the pressure of winter, or did the Wendigo truly walk among them? The footsteps in the snow, the branches snapping in the silence, the whispers that urge you to eat. These signs return again and again in every account, across centuries. Maybe that is why people still believe, because even now, in the frozen forests of North America, the same sounds echo in the night. And if you ever find yourself alone in that silence, hungry and cold, you may begin to wonder, is the wind really just the wind, or is the Wendigo calling your name? Chapter 4. Wendigo Psychosis. When legends grow too strong to ignore, science often steps in to try and explain them. The Wendigo is no exception. Beyond stories of gaunt monsters with glowing eyes and frozen hearts lies another theory, one that shifts the focus from the supernatural to the human mind. This theory is known as Wendigo psychosis. The term first appeared in the mid-20th century, when anthropologists and psychologists began documenting strange cases among indigenous communities in northern Canada. These weren't stories passed down through folklore. These were medical files and field reports about people who believed they were turning into monsters, people who claimed they were developing a craving for human flesh. The question was unsettling. Were these individuals suffering from mental illness, or were they truly under the influence of something darker, something ancient that science could not name? The diagnosis in simple terms, Wendigo psychosis, was described as a culture-bound syndrome. It appeared only in regions where the Wendigo legend was widely known, and only among people who grew up believing the creature was real. Symptoms often started in winter. A man might become withdrawn, stop eating, and complain of strange dreams. Soon, he would whisper that something inside him was changing, that he could feel his body stretching, his hunger shifting toward something unnatural. Doctors who studied these cases wrote of patients insisting they could smell human flesh, even when no one was cooking. Some swore they could hear voices whispering from the trees, calling them into the forest. Others were convinced their skin was growing too tight, their bones changing beneath it. For families already living on the edge of survival, this kind of madness was terrifying. The most disturbing part, many of those diagnosed with Wendigo psychosis begged to be restrained. Some pleaded for their own deaths. They feared what they might do if left alone. To them, the transformation wasn't just in their minds, it was real. The story's one well-documented case came from a Cree trapper in the early 1900s. He had survived a brutal winter, but when the snow thawed, he began to complain of strange visions. He told neighbors that something followed him in the forest, a shadowy figure with burning eyes. At night, he said he heard a voice telling him that if he wanted to live, he would have to eat human flesh. The man grew frantic. He tied himself to a tree so he wouldn't hurt anyone. By spring, he was gone, disappeared into the wilderness. Another account involved a woman who refused food for weeks, terrified that any bite of meat might awaken the Wendigo inside her. She begged her family to keep her away from children. In her final days, she whispered that she could feel her heart turning to ice. These stories didn't come from horror novels. They were written into official reports by missionaries, settlers, and later, psychiatrists who struggled to explain them. Science versus spirit. To psychologists, the explanation seemed straightforward. Isolation, starvation, and cultural fear combined to create a form of hysteria. In regions where winters were unforgiving, the threat of starvation was real. Families sometimes faced impossible choices. Folklore gave those choices a face and a name. In this view, Wendigo psychosis wasn't about monsters in the woods. It was about human minds cracking under extreme pressure. When starvation blurred the line between survival and morality, the story of the Wendigo became a framework to explain the unthinkable. But to indigenous communities, dismissing the Wendigo as just psychology felt incomplete. For them, the legend was more than metaphor. It was a warning woven into the land itself. Elders argued that labeling it a syndrome was a way for outsiders to dismiss something sacred and terrifying. The gray area, what makes the discussion haunting, is the overlap between folklore and psychiatry. Imagine living in the frozen wilderness, with nothing but trees and snow in every direction. Imagine your family running out of food, your stomach burning with hunger, your mind slipping toward desperation. Now add to that the constant reminder that somewhere out there in the woods waits the Wendigo. Every sound of cracking branches, every whisper of wind, it all becomes proof. In such conditions, belief and reality can merge until they are indistinguishable. Some researchers admitted as much. They noted that while Wendigo psychosis fit the clinical mold of hysteria or psychosis, the cultural framework gave it shape. Without the Wendigo legend, would those same symptoms have existed? Or did the myth itself act like a trigger, turning fear into transformation? Voices in the wilderness. Eyewitness testimony adds another layer. Hunters claimed that during Wendigo psychosis, they saw their loved ones' eyes change. They described a strange odor in the air, something like rot or frozen meat. Families swore they heard whispers outside their lodges, urging the afflicted to leave. Were these hallucinations shared out of panic, or was something else moving through the forest, feeding on fear? One chilling report described a man who escaped into the woods after declaring he was turning. Days later, searchers found his body frozen, mouth stained red with blood. No animals were near him. No explanation was offered. The official records marked it as delusion leading to death by exposure. But to the community, the truth was simpler. He had been claimed by the Wendigo. Akulturau, Jiviji. By the late 20th century, Western medicine stopped using the term Wendigo psychosis. It was considered outdated, even offensive. Modern psychiatry classified such cases as schizophrenia or severe paranoia. To doctors, the Wendigo was nothing more than folklore applied to a breakdown. Yet the legend lives on. In Cree and Ojibwe stories, the Wendigo is still a warning against greed, hunger, and isolation. In northern communities, whispers of Wendigo sightings persist whenever the snow grows heavy and food grows scarce. So what are we left with? Was Wendigo psychosis just a tragic misunderstanding of mental illness? Or was it a genuine encounter with something too old and too dangerous for science to name? The truth may be both. Maybe the human mind and the ancient wilderness are more connected than we want to admit. Maybe when fear and hunger collide, the Wendigo doesn't just appear in stories, it walks among us. Chapter 5, The Forest Still Hungers. The Wendigo is not only a relic of the past, it is not confined to yellowed pages of folklore or to the nightmares of starving families in the 1800s. Even now, in the modern age of satellites, smartphones, and highways that cut through once forbidden forests, the legend continues to stir. The hunger has not vanished. If anything, it has adapted. Across Canada and the northern United States, campers, hunters, and hikers still whisper of things they cannot explain. Strange figures in the snow, footsteps that echo when no one is there, a sense deep and primal that the trees are alive and watching. These aren't just tales passed down from elders. They are fresh stories, told online, in forums, in campfire retellings that go viral. The question is unavoidable. Why does the Wendigo refuse to fade when so many other myths have been swallowed by time? Modern encounters. One hunter in Ontario recalled a night deep in the bush where he tracked moose for hours. As the sky darkened and snow began to fall, he felt the air shift. He turned and saw something tall moving between the trees. At first, he thought it was another hunter, but then he noticed how unnaturally it moved, jerky, as if its bones were too long for its body. When he called out, the figure vanished, but the snow beneath his boots told a different story. Two sets of tracks, one his own, one impossibly large, with long clawed impressions. Another tale came from a group of campers near the Minnesota border. They woke to a sound like someone circling their tent. Each time they flashed a light outside, nothing appeared, but the crunch of footsteps in snow never stopped. By morning, they found prints deep, skeletal, stretching far longer than any human stride. One camper swore that just before sunrise, he heard a low voice outside the tent, whispering his name. And then there are the hikers who never return. Their stories are pieced together from abandoned campsites, scattered gear, and footprints that vanish mid-trail. Police reports label these tragedies as accidents, people lost to weather, exhaustion, or predators. But to those who know the old tales, the pattern is clear. The forest still hungers. The digital campfire in the age of the internet. Myths spread faster than ever. Online communities on Reddit, YouTube, and TikTok are filled with chilling stories of things stalking the woods. Posts titled, "Something Watching Me in the Snow," or "The Tall Thing by the Campfire," gather thousands of comments. Some share their own encounters. Others dismiss the tales as fiction. But the pattern is undeniable. The Wendigo has found a new hunting ground, our collective imagination. One viral post described a man driving late at night through northern Alberta. On a deserted road, his headlights caught a figure crossing. It was tall, gaunt, and pale. Its head turned slowly, revealing glowing eyes. The man swore it wasn't human. He refused to stop, even as he heard a heavy thud on the roof of his truck minutes later. When he reached town, nothing was there but scratches ran deep across the metal. Skeptics call these urban legends the product of isolation, fear, and overactive imaginations. But believers argue that such widespread reports cannot be coincidence. After all, if the Wendigo is only a story, why do so many people describe the same thing? A cryptid in the modern world. The Wendigo has also found a place in the growing culture of cryptids, mysterious creatures said to exist on the edge of belief. Bigfoot, Mothman, and the Jersey Devil all share space in modern folklore, but the Wendigo stands apart. It isn't just a mystery animal, it is hunger itself given shape. Cryptid hunters travel into the deep woods with cameras and thermal scanners, hoping to capture evidence. Paranormal podcasts discuss encounters late into the night. Even mainstream media occasionally publishes stories when hikers report strange skeletal figures, or when police respond to screams in forests where no one lives. But unlike other cryptids, the Wendigo isn't playful or curious. It embodies something far more terrifying, the thin line between survival and monstrosity. Too many, that is why it endures. Why the Wendigo persists. Most ancient myths fade as technology advances. Few people still fear sirens luring sailors into the sea, or dragons waiting in caves. But the Wendigo persists because it speaks to something that never changes: hunger, greed, and isolation. The northern wilderness remains unforgiving. Even with modern gear, people still vanish in the snow. Rescue teams still find empty camps, still hear strange noises carried on the wind. The fear that drove earlier generations, the fear of being consumed by hunger or by something waiting in the dark, still lingers. And perhaps there is another reason. Perhaps myths like the Wendigo do not die because they are more than stories. They are echoes of something real, something that walks where the forest grows thick and human presence grows thin. The forest remembers. Indigenous elders often say that the land remembers. Every tree, every stone, every drift of snow holds memory. The Wendigo, they warn, is not just a monster, it is hunger itself. Hunger does not die, it waits. Maybe that is why people still see skeletal figures at the edge of firelight. Maybe that is why footsteps echo in the snow when no one is there. The forest itself remembers centuries of starvation, of desperate choices, of blood spilled to survive. Those memories take form. They walk, they whisper. And so, even today, the Wendigo still stalks the imagination. It is not only a creature of folklore, it is the shadow of our own fears, dressed in the shape of bones and ice. The lingering question: the modern world would like to believe it has explained everything. Science dismisses Wendigo sightings as illusions. Police reports call missing hikers accidents. Psychiatrists file strange delusions under mental illness. But the stories keep coming. So we are left with a question that has no easy answer. Is the Wendigo simply a story that refuses to die? Or is it something more? Something that waits in the cold silence of the woods, older than science, older than history. Maybe the truth is not about proving whether the Wendigo is real or not. Maybe the truth is about listening to the forest, to the whispers that carry through the snow. Because whether we believe or not, the legend remains, and the forest still hungers. Chapter 6. Echoes of the Wendigo. The Wendigo has walked with us through history. From the snowbound villages of the Cree and Algonquin to the online forums of today. It is more than a monster of bones and ice. It is an echo, a reminder of what human beings can become when hunger, greed, and desperation take hold. In the end, the Wendigo is not only about the wilderness, it is about us. The symbol of hunger. Hunger is one of the oldest human fears. For early tribes in the frozen north, hunger was death, slow and merciless. The Wendigo legend carried that fear, shaping it into something people could see, imagine, and whisper about. A tall skeletal figure that reminded them of what awaited if survival demanded too much. But hunger is not always about food. The Wendigo also represents greedy, the hunger for more than what is needed. In stories, it is not just starving hunters who become monsters. It is those who consume without end, who cannot stop even when they already have enough. That warning is as relevant today as it was hundreds of years ago. In this sense, the Wendigo is both personal and universal. It whispers of the cravings that twist human nature, the cravings that turn survival into selfishness. The weakness within every culture has stories about weakness. The Greeks spoke of hubris, pride that led to downfall. Christianity warns of temptation and sin. For the people of the northern forests, weakness took the form of hunger and greed. The Wendigo was their warning, their reminder that even the strongest hunter could fall if he gave in to the wrong desire. What makes the Wendigo terrifying is not just its appearance. It is the fact that its origin lies inside the human heart. It begins with a person, someone like you, someone like me, who makes a choice or loses control. That is why the story lingers. Because the Wendigo is not just outside, waiting in the trees. It is inside, waiting in the cracks of our willpower. Folklore or reality, we live in an age that demands answers. Scientists look for patterns. Skeptics look for proof. And so the Wendigo becomes a case study, a psychosis, a cultural myth meant to explain human behavior. But for those who have seen things in the forest, shapes too tall, eyes glowing in the dark, the explanation feels empty. The line between folklore and reality is thin, blurred by snow and silence. Maybe the Wendigo is a metaphor, or maybe it is something older, something that has always been there, watching. Legends often begin with truth, even if that truth gets buried under centuries of retelling. The forest does not care whether we call it myth or science. It holds its secrets all the same. The persistence of fear, other myths fade. Dragons become fairy tales. Sirens become poetry. But the Wendigo survives. Why? Because hunger never goes away. Hunger is universal. It creeps into every generation in one form or another. Sometimes it is literal starvation. Sometimes it is greed for power, wealth, or control. The Wendigo speaks to that timeless fear, that when the moment comes, when survival is on the line, we may not recognize ourselves. We may become something else, something we swore we never would. That is why the legend continues to echo through the ages. It is not just about monsters in the woods. It is about the monsters we carry with us, the haunting thought. So what do we do with this story? Do we dismiss it as folklore, a relic of harder times? Or do we carry it with us as a warning, a reminder that greed and hunger always wait just beneath the surface? The Wendigo forces us to look inward, to ask ourselves, what would we do if survival demanded more than we could give? Would we remain human, or would we cross the line? And then, there is the darker question. What if the Wendigo is not only a metaphor? What if something ancient does live in the cold silence of the forests, watching and waiting for those moments when human weakness is at its peak? The next time you find yourself far from city lights, standing in the stillness of the woods, listen closely, hear the wind between the branches, feel the silence pressing down, and then ask yourself, what if something is already watching? If this story left you thinking, if you felt that chill in your spine, remember, the Wendigo is more than just a legend. It's a reminder. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe the Wendigo is real, or is it just a story to keep our fears in check? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore more dark truths and chilling legends from around the world, consider subscribing to the channel. Like this video if it made you think twice about the silence of the forest. There are many more stories waiting in the shadows.